All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for joining us and making time for this conversation. I've been really looking forward to it. I didn't tell you this, but actually, even though we've never met, our paths have kind of intersected because I actually got married at Cincinnati Friends Meeting.
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my wife is from Tennessee, where we live now, and I'm from Ohio. And so we decided to make a destination wedding to, Cincinnati, Ohio, to as kind of a like meet in the middle kind of for family members. So it was
Great.
and we visited a couple times, and
Well, I'm good to
uh
know that connection. Yeah.
yeah, it's a lovely space to
Yeah.
host that kind of sacred occasion. So good
So,
memories there. But if you wanted to start just by kind of giving us your journey among Quakers. So how did you become a Quaker, or were you kind of a birthright Quaker, and where have you traveled among us?
well, I have my relationship with Quakerism, of course, was at birth. And I come from a long line, probably reaching back 10 or 11 generations back to England. The Newby family very early on joined George Fox and his new movement in and around Kendal or the Lake District. And so there have been many newbies in minute books throughout the years of various meetings. We had my family had a Quaker martyr by the name of Margaret Newby, who preached in the little town of Evesham, and she was put in the stocks overnight on a cold November night, caught cold and became ill and never recovered and died finally as a result of that exposure. And so she's in the Book of Sufferings very early on. And then we came to this country and settled on the eastern shore of North Carolina, and went to and began a little meeting there called Piney Woods. And Piney Woods is still in operation. It's the oldest continuous place of worship in the state of North Carolina. And if you ever get into the Perquimans, Pasquotank counties, you'll find a lot of newbies. And as a matter of fact, there's a monument to the visit by William Edmondson and George Fox in Hertford, North Carolina, and it's at the corner of Newby and Church Street. So that's my claim to fame in the Eastern Shore of Carolina. Then we of course migrated to Indiana, Western Wayne County, on out west to Iowa and further points. But my father was a Quaker minister. My great grandfather was a Quaker minister. And so we've been associated with Quakers forever. It is my tradition. And I told the friends on Sunday morning, as I was talking about, we just took one of those bus tours around Southwest Ohio, looking at all of the various. The state of Ohio developed this, what they call a Quaker Scenic Byway. It's really a wonderful experience. We had Christine Snyder from Springfield Friends Meeting leading the tour. And so we went to all of these friends meetings, and I told them on Sunday morning, I stand in awe at the heritage that I have inherited. And it's just a wonderful tradition, and one that I am greatly appreciative of. So that's my beginning in Quakerism. And my house, I mean, as a little boy, I grew up in a home that would bring visiting Quaker ministers to spend the night before they would speak on a Sunday morning at my father's meeting. And so we had persons like Bayard Rustin, who is a Black gay Quaker who organized the March on Washington. He was an overnight guest a number of times. Douglas Steer and Dorothy Steer from Haverford College. Of course, Elton Trueblood was a constant visitor. So I really had a rich tradition at home, as well as a broader tradition among Quakers, because I got to meet and talk Quakerism with all of these very interesting, weighty friends.
Wow. Yeah. So a very rich heritage. within Quakerism. And I can imagine that's great being able to meet all those people just coming through your house and having those conversations.
Yes, it was. I can remember sitting at the breakfast table at Wichita when I invited Canby Jones out to speak, and we chatted for a couple of hours on his famous theme, "The Lamb's War." And so T. Canby was one of my favorites, and we miss him amongst friends greatly. And I just saw some of his Wilmington College tradition on Saturday when I was up there. So it was a very rich tradition. Now, of course, right in the middle of all of the institutional Quaker activities in which I was involved, I left and became a UCC minister for a while. And then that's where I met Jackie Perry out in Plymouth Church in Des Moines, Iowa. And by the way, Plymouth Church has the longest aisle of any church in the state of Iowa. Did you know that, Jackie? We would have brides come to Plymouth to get married because of the long aisle they could walk down.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah. We almost set up a water station halfway down because it was so long and you get winded. But so I went out there and I was looking for a progressive community. I was in the middle of it was just constant fighting among friends at that time. I was editor of Quaker Life magazine. I was on the faculty of ESR, and I was directing the Yokefellow movement with Elton. And so I found myself just absolutely immersed in institutional Quakerism to the point where it drove me crazy because of all the nuttiness that was going on with fights over the LGBTQ questions that were arising and still are, splitting churches and denominations today. And also the New Age religion, I think, was another concern that someone told me about. It just got to be crazy. So when I was out at the Yokefellow Institute, a man by the name of Lyle Schaller, who was a Methodist minister, would come there and lead seminars for ministers. I'd go out and have lunch with him. I said, where are the exciting places today? Where are the places that are progressive and growing? Because all we heard about was the growth of evangelical churches at the time. And he pointed me to Plymouth Church in Des Moines. And so I saw in Christian Century that they were looking for a minister of spiritual growth, and called up the minister there and said, I'm looking to have a break from institutional Quakerism for a while. And he had just read an article of mine in the Alban Institute newsletter. And so we connected right away, and that's where I went, leaving friends for a while, taking a sabbatical from Quakers, I guess.
Yeah, just needed a break for a while.
Yeah, and that was a good break. And then 17 years later, I get a call from Cincinnati Meeting, and I had been here before between 1975 and 1980 during, I call it the time of the Big Red Machine. Those of you who love baseball like I do.
Oh, yeah.
Johnny Bench and Pete Rose and Tony Concepcion and all of those folks. Well, I was here that time at that time and had the joy of going down to the ballpark and watching them whenever I could. And the head of the search committee called me and said, Jim, would you like to come home? And tears welled up in my eyes. And I said, I want to come home, and I'm ready to come back to Quakers, especially Cincinnati Meeting, which is one of the finest meetings in the country. So I was ready to come home.
What makes it so special to you?
Well, first of all, it has this wonderful style of worship that they call semi-programmed. It is a place where I get to speak every week, a brief message, but the rest of the time it's absolutely open worship. I mean, it's silent meeting. People do stand to speak. We have some academics in our meeting who love to speak every week. So Quakers have that problem all over, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just a wonderful place to be, and it's a growing progressive meeting in suburban Cincinnati. And the good news is we have absolutely no mortgage, no indebtedness,
Nice.
and we have a rather large endowment that pays my salary. So you have all of you don't have monetary issues to worry about.
Mm,
You don't have membership issues because we're growing because of the urban area in which we're located. And so it's just a great place to be. But I'm convinced that the semi-program style of worship is the style that we need to emulate.
mm,
I think it was Elton Trueblood who wrote an article for Quaker Life about some of the meetings around Indiana. He says, you know, there's no difference between them and a United Methodist congregational meeting. I think he said it a Quaker Life article, by the way, that here you have three hymns, a benediction, and a poorly delivered sermon. Because this isn't Quakerism. This is Protestantism at the end of the line.
mm-hmm,
And that's
mm,
a line that I'll never forget. And it's
yeah,
haunted. So
yeah, yeah. There's I live in East Tennessee, and my wife and I co-pastor a very small meeting here, and in this county there are 38 Southern Baptist churches. And so when people are inquiring about the church, some people want to be like, well, we're just, we're kind of like, the other churches in here. And I'm like, there's 38 other Southern Baptist church. We might as well be a Quaker one,
yeah, it'd be
and
the
have a
39th,
role in the
right?
county. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, it seems like Elton Trueblood has been an important mentor and guide for you. Could you tell us more about your relationship with him?
Well, I've known him since I was a little boy, and as I said, he'd come to our home to visit, and my father would have him speak at meeting, whether it was Friends Memorial in Muncie or Wichita or Minneapolis, wherever my father was. And so we became acquainted very early on, and then he was the one who convinced me to come back to ESR. I at the time was being given an opportunity to be the minister at a Methodist church in southeast Nebraska. I was in Central City as the Quaker minister, but the method I became very well acquainted with a Methodist minister who was trying to encourage me to become a Methodist. And St. Paul's Theological Seminary in Kansas City was giving me a great scholarship, and so I was ready to go to St. Paul's in Kansas City. And he wrote me and encouraged me to come to ESR, and it was his letter that moved me to Earlham. And I became the minister of Chester and New Burlington Friends Meetings in Western Ohio, and then traveled up there twice a week to take classes. But Trueblood, he's been an influence all my life. I read all of his books very early on. He wrote 38 of them. And then he asked me to come and direct what was called the Yoke Fellow Academy with him. And I moved up, leaving Cincinnati in 1979 or 1980. I think I was part-time pastor at Cincinnati through 79. And then in 1980, it was just full-time up at Richmond. So I'd meet with him every day, and he'd always have stories to tell about his life and ministry. And he was a constant companion for 15 years. And I wrote his biography in 1990. I was able to get it to him before he left this world, and he was able to read it. So it was a labor of love for sure to write Elton's life story. And I was privileged to his diaries and some of his private papers. And
Oh, wow.
one of his diaries, he wrote about this change in his life, which came around at midlife, which is when all of our changes usually take place. And he was always one who was a disciplinarian and one who focused on the disciplines of the academic world. And he would be pretty strong with those who were his students. And he wrote in his diary, he says, I've given my life up to this point to excellence in terms of my teaching and in terms of what I expect from students. He says, I'm going to try what love will do, and be much less strident concerning my expectations with these students, and much more loving. And so you saw that change of heart, that change of life experience with Elton, and his heart grew deeper and greater. And he was making that wonderful move from his mind to his heart. And it was a wonderful thing to witness in Dr. D. Elton Trueblood, you know. And a lot of people never were, they weren't able to see that change in Elton. And I was fortunate enough to see that and to recognize it and to understand it, quite frankly, as I went through some of the same things in my own life. So.
Interesting. Yeah. I was mentored by Dave Kingery, who is out there, and
Yes.
he's at Barkley now, but yeah, in Wichita, and he talked a lot about Elton, and he would say we should be tough with ideas and tender with people.
Yeah,
was his quotation from him.
it's a good
But
one.
yeah, another person that came up in your book that is a little more surprising was Richard Nixon. And so can
Right.
you yeah, so how did that come up in your life?
Well, my grandmother, my mother's mother, her name was Prignitz. She was very German, and she lived with us for a while. And it was during the time Richard Nixon was president. And well, fun story was when I was with my grandmother watching Nixon in China, and he was at one of those one of those big banquet halls toasting with the Chinese president, and they were drinking white wine together. And knowing my grandmother was a great lover of Richard Nixon, I would tease her and say, "Look, Grandma, there's our Quaker president drinking alcohol. Oh my God, you know." And her response was, "Oh no, Jim, he's just putting it to his lips. He's not swallowing." And
Kind
that's
of
what,
like the didn't inhale kind of thing there. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's delusional, and it made me realize how delusional one can be when they are following a political leader. We have a lot of that with the cult of Donald Trump. People don't listen to facts or want to hear the truth. They'd rather not. And so they make up delusions like my grandmother, he's not swallowing. And that satisfied her concern. But at the dinner table in the evening, it was, you know, I think about 1968 specifically, when they were all running for president. I was for Eugene McCarthy. As a college kid, everybody was for Gene McCarthy. We all went clean for Gene. And then there was Hubert Humphrey. And my father was the chair of the Human Relations Committee in Minneapolis, which Mayor Humphrey formed. He was the first chair of that committee. And so he loved Hubert Humphrey, thought the sun rose and set on Hubert Humphrey. And then there was my grandmother, who was a Nixon supporter. So our dinner conversations during the year 1968 were quite interesting.
Yeah. Very lively, I'm sure.
Yes.
Great. Well, now that we've gotten all that context, which was all great, let's go ahead and get into your book, which I really liked. For those who haven't gotten it or haven't seen it, it's called Finding Yourself in Chaos. So it's kind of a double meaning with that, finding yourself in chaos, self-discovery for religious leaders in a time of transition. This is a really great book, and co-authored it with Mark Manier. And so everybody should go get a copy of that. And though I noticed that you had written about chaos before, so is this kind of that was more of, it looks like maybe more of a biographical, spiritual reflection, but is this kind of a theme that you've seen in your life and leadership?
Well, it's certainly made a difference in my ministry. Yeah, the book you're referring to that was published by Continuum was in 1997 or 98, one or the other. And that was more a spiritual autobiography about my own life in those areas that I saw in my midlife years that I was going through. And I always tried to, a lot of persons go through some of these changes. My only child, our only child, was left for college in Michigan. Elton Trueblood left Richmond to go to a retirement center near Philadelphia. I was going through a divorce. There was just a great deal of chaos in my life and struggle, so I wrote this book, which was published, and this is sort of a follow-up on that. And that I always tried to keep the chaos that I was personally experiencing within the sacred context. This was my culture. And it didn't take me long to realize that chaos is a consistent theme throughout the Bible. We were made out of chaos in Genesis, and we are being remade in chaos constantly. It's whenever, I mean, for me, it was God tapping me on the shoulder and then shaking me and finally throwing a brick at my head to get my attention. And a lot of the things that I just mentioned swirling around me put me in a place of chaos. I was like I likened myself to the fellow in the circus who keeps plates on a stick, who has about 5 or 6 plates going all the time. And just when one starts to come down, he goes over and does that. And that was my life. Keeping all of those plates going, whether it was keeping my relationship with Elton going, or keeping my relationship at Earlham going, or keeping my relationship with my wife going, and then trying to manage all of the losses in my life that I was experiencing, the death of my father at a rather young age, at 62 years, and the death of my mother, who in the end had a serious form of dementia. And the plates started crashing down all around me. And so I was in chaos, but I always tried to keep that chaos focused on the sacred and how God was speaking to me. The lessons I was learning out of that was in every experience that I had, and this is what I try to say is important for all of us, is to ask in each experience of life, how is God at work here? Followed by, what spiritual lesson or lessons am I learning? Followed by, for religious leaders, how does this make me a more effective minister? And that question for me throughout all of the chaos I was going through in my life, the last question, made me a softer, more tender person. It's that old line about God shines through the broken places. And my places were pretty broken. And yet I never felt I did feel God's absence, but I had a remarkable experience on the beach on the coast of North Carolina, which I share in my I think I put it in Finding Yourself in Chaos as well, where I was sitting on the beach weeping. I was down there, I was trying to edit a couple of books that I had been asked to finish, and I was weeping on the beach, looking at the sunrise, which was just beautiful. And I heard the words, "Everything's going to be all right." What do I do with that? I don't know. As one who has been trained in critical thinking, I started thinking about it critically and reflectively. What does this mean? And I concluded, I believe, that it was the infinite trying to reach out to me, the finite, and to surround me in God's love, and to give me strength to continue even through the chaos. And so that was a very important transformational experience for me. And I've had some others since, but that one was vital.
Mm, that's beautiful. Yeah, I'd say that's something I think most of us have experienced, that chaos at some time or another when I think of it when we lost control.
Yeah.
I feel like we can't control things anymore.
Well, I think that's
Um,
the illusion I was under beforehand,
mm,
that I
mhm,
could control things. Whether it was, pointing Quaker Life in the direction I wanted it to go editorially, or whether it was keeping ESR focused on Quaker ministry and raising money for ESR. I remember raising, I think it was $120,000 for the Trueblood room in the new building. And that was an important thing for me to do. And I was keeping ESR going, I'm going to raise money for them. And of course, my dean, Tom Mullen, loved that. Anyone who can help raise money for ESR, he loved. But there was, everything. I found out I wasn't in control. That's the illusion, is that you do
mhm,
have control of things, and in the end, no, you don't. God has control of things, and that was the revelation that awakened me.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think about there was a season in my life where I also went through a divorce and had a mentor pass away. Kind of several things converged at the same time. And yeah, just that feeling of for me, it was like being swallowed up by the whale. There's big fish in Jonah, you know,
Yeah.
and that sense of chaos that comes with that. But also, I like how you're talking about the sacred potential of chaos, both in individual lives and for communities, um, congregations. I think about M. Scott Peck, who wrote about the stages of community and that we can only get from pseudo community to real community by going through chaos.
Yeah.
And do you see that in your work as a pastor or with other congregations that kind of have to go through that stage of going through some conflict and chaos before getting to that deeper community?
Well, I think Scott Peck is right. And by the way, I helped him write his book In Search of Stones. I don't know whether any of you have
Oh,
ever read that book, but he didn't acknowledge me in the acknowledgments when I got a copy.
oh,
It was fine. I don't care. I don't copyright anything, and if I help someone, it's out of love. I don't do it because I want to have acknowledgement. But he recognized it and then phoned me at ESR and was so embarrassed, and so he sent me a book with a wonderful inscription in it. And then he said he'd offer me free psychiatric service for the rest of my life. And I thought, does it show that badly? I mean,
yeah.
so
How do you take that?
yeah,
Yeah,
how do I
wow.
take that? Yeah. So anyway, we used to have him. He became a good friend. We used to have him out at the Institute, the Oakfellow Institute on the back campus, and every year he'd come and he'd always help us raise our budget because he brought in a lot of money for us. But
That's helpful.
I look upon I gave this to Scott Wagner, one of the other Quaker ministers in the world, and Scott I think was using it at Plainfield meeting Katrina over there when he did his workshop, a thing on the different types of congregations, and you have thriving congregations, you have maintaining congregations, you have surviving congregations, and you have dying congregations. And I say in the area of survival, that's the chaos period. When the numerical decline and the monetary decline become realities, and people are struggling in their communities of faith because of those two things. And as you know, Andy, ministers are judged by the number of members they bring in and the amount of money they bring in. Those are two things they can judge you on during ministry and counsel. And if you're in decline, you become open at a survivalist mode. In a survivalist mode, you become open to new ideas, to refreshing challenges that might move you to new places spiritually within your congregation. That's the exciting thing about becoming a surviving congregation. Maintaining congregations, they're pretty well endowed. They take care of themselves, and their first question is, how do we keep our members content? And I claim that in every local meeting or every local church, if you have as the question at the beginning of every one of your meetings, how can we more effectively reach people with the message of Jesus Christ? That question ought to permeate even the trustees meeting that are worried about the building, even the adult committee that's worried about education. That's the kind of question and query that you need to be asking. And you only begin to ask it seems, once you're in chaos and in a survivalist mode, and you start to look for new ways to deal with things. And so that's been my experience anyway in the church consultations I've done. So I try to help people embrace the chaos in their lives and in communities of faith to embrace that chaos. Because it could lead to new and exciting forms of ministry and a new passion for ministry for the leaders.
Along that line, you talk about a new institutional landscape, I believe you call it, that you see across churches and congregations among friends, but also in the wider kind of social civil landscape in our country. What does that look like? What do you see when you look across that landscape?
Well, it's interesting. I had a pretty clear picture of it on Saturday on our Southwest Ohio Quaker Byway tour. And at each stop, we had 28 from Cincinnati Meeting who went on this trip. They wanted to see the mothership, which is Miami Monthly Meeting in Waynesville, and which was the meeting that had all of these preparative meetings underneath it. One of them was Cincinnati. But they would ask, how many people do you have out on a Sunday morning? Well, at Miami Monthly Meeting, the mothership, where they used to have 1,000 people sitting in worship, they now have 1 to 6 people on a Sunday morning. And you go into that meeting house, which was built in 1811, and the mustiness overwhelms you. The old meeting house and the mustiness and the dusty remnants of a time long past is what you have. It became clear that we're in a time of change. The nuns and the duns are the fastest growing group in every Pew Research poll that we take. People are saying they're either not affiliated with any church or synagogue or mosque, or they're completely done with the institutional church or institutional synagogue or institutional mosque. I claim that Quakers have an opportunity here. I became excited when I was a very young minister about looking at Quakerism as a third way that we can offer people a place of spirituality. We just hired at Cincinnati Meeting, we just hired a director of spiritual nurture. And her job description is to first of all, develop spiritual nurture groups within our meeting, but also to be a spokesperson for spiritual nurture throughout the community of Cincinnati, which respects us as a congregation that can be helpful to them because they're struggling, and we're not, as I said earlier, and so we can be helpful to others. But we have a message, and as you come into our meeting house, you have this huge poster with every one of our testimonies on it. People can look and see what we're all about. Our spices, as you know, that we're very proud of. And we have, being in a suburban Cincinnati, we have a lot of visitors, people who are dropping out of the main line in Roman Catholicism And we're a very Catholic oriented community here in Cincinnati, but they're dropping out, and they're looking for something else because the itch deep in their soul is not being reached by where they are. And they come into Cincinnati meeting, and they see this rather barren meeting room. The first thing they notice is there are no icons and no stained glass windows. A very simple meeting house, located, by the way, in the richest suburban community of Cincinnati. Our neighbors aren't simple, but we are. So they see the contrast immediately. The focus is on the gathered community. The focus is not on the altar. The focus is not on the pulpit. The focus is on the gathered community. And people like that. And so we get a lot of persons now who are excited about Quakerism because they've come in and become convinced from the other side. And in April, we have a tour of the 1652 country planned. And a large group from the meeting will be going over there, and a Ben Pink Dandelion will be the leader, who's written about Quakerism, as you know, as a professor at the University of Birmingham. But they're all excited, to see Pendle Hill and see all these things that they'd heard about. And it's an exciting thing to watch these new Quakers get passionate about their faith again, because they had been so discouraged where they were. And for one thing, we never ask them for money. That's the other thing. We have a donation box out in the entryway where they can put money if they want. But all of their money, all of their donations that they make go to outreach programs of the meeting. And that's a big selling point. It's if they know that their check is going to outreach, they don't mind giving, and they give a lot. They don't really like to give to keeping the lights on or paying the minister or whatever. And so they don't have to.
It's the axiom that money follows mission.
Yeah.
Kind of, people like to give to something they believe in and is making a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting that, a lot of congregations, especially, in the previous 30 years, spent so much energy trying to be new and innovative and flashy. And, there's still a time and place for updating things and, doing interesting projects. But sometimes it's those old enduring testimonies, and you talk about virtues that draw people in, the simplicity that's not probably something that shows up on a strategic plan to reach new people, but people are hungry for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Andy, I don't think another praise song and a praise band are going to bring people back to the church. And I know that a lot of churches think that that's the way it should work. And so they keep trying to make their worship services contemporary. But what we have is offer a radical alternative. And some of the nuns and duns will come back and they'll like this radical alternative, and some won't. They'll stay out, and that's fine. God loves them too. But if you're looking for a community that truly is a beloved community, and Quakerism can make that happen, because community is one of our testimonies, for one thing. But then become a Quaker, and it's an exciting time for Quakers, I think.
Yeah, there's a pastor, Bob Henry, that's in Indianapolis First Friends, and he was telling me about a conversation he had with somebody, and they said, "Boy, you Quakers here are on the cutting edge of silence." Cutting edge of silence.
Yeah,
wow. Yeah, really.
Well, I think one of the gifts that we give to the world is group silence. There are a lot of traditions that value individual silence, but I think that what we give to the larger community of faith is the group silence. And that's very important. And you can tell when that group silence is really working, when you have what we call a gathered meeting, and it runs deep and it touches people's hearts. You can feel that in that silence.
Definitely. And so connected with that is this group of seekers that you've done this, I think, some work researching that and writing about that. And so you see, like many Quakers, George Fox and Thomas Kelly talked about seeing seekers, out there, great people to be gathered, so to speak. And so tell us more about what you see. What do those seekers look like?
Well, that yeah, the title of one of my books is Gathering the Seekers. And that was published by the Alban Institute a while back. And it really was a reflection. I never do anything once, by the way. I always try to reuse material. And for my thesis at Princeton, it was on this topic, which became a Lilly grant, which became a book. And so I always try to incorporate, because I just have so much I can offer. And so I try to use things over and over again if I can.
That's reduce, reuse, recycle.
That's right. But that was basically about the Net Groups program, Nurturing Experience Theologically. That is time for the church to take seriously the need to develop critical and reflective thinkers. I think one of the problems of our day is the loss of that within our culture at large. And they don't look at scripture critically or reflectively. They don't look at their lives and their beliefs critically or reflectively. And it's something that I think the church and the meeting can offer people, is to move them to a place where they can begin to ask questions. Okay, so how did you come to this conclusion? Tell me the process you went through. Why was the author of the Gospel of John writing the way he did in the 90s, which is different from Mark, who wrote in the 70s? And so look at things critically and reflectively. And I think the silence is also helpful in that, in meditative silence, to help people think reflectively and critically. And so that whole process is something that you learn along the way. I think those of us who have been within Quakerism for a long time, it ought to come naturally for us. And this belief in continuing revelation, that God is continuing to reveal. I had an experience, but one of my good friends was Malcolm Muggeridge in England. Malcolm was the one who wrote about Mother Teresa and really brought her into prominence. He wrote a little book called Something Beautiful for God, and that brought her into national and international attention and her ministry. And late in life, he became a Christian. He had been an agnostic up until then. And he called himself a vendor of words. And you can still go to YouTube and see his interview with Bertrand Russell and William Buckley Jr. and a number of great thinkers, and the way he challenges everyone's thinking. But Malcolm was one who had a transformational experience, became a Christian. And when I went to see him one time in his home in Sussex, Robertsbridge, he had on the wall all of these copies of the scripture, of the Bible, all of these various translations. And then he had this huge section right next to it. And I said, Malcolm, I go, what are all these books next to your collection of Bibles? And he goes, that's what I call my third testament. They were the classics of devotion. There was Thomas à Kempis' Imitation of Christ. There was Julian of Norwich. There was any number of others. And what Quakers have always believed in is the continuing revelation of God, that the Bible is I tell people I keep my canon open. I'm a Quaker. And I believe that God continues to reveal today. And right along with that, you put John Woolman's journal, Thomas Kelly's Testament of Devotion, a number of books by Rufus Jones, and William Penn's Fruits of Solitude. All of these are a part of my third testament. And as I said, pay attention to your experiences and ask, how is God working here? As Quakers, that should be the first question we ask every time we experience life and what we're going through.
Yeah, that's an interesting query to consider, is, what's my third testament? What's in that canon?
Yeah.
So I do want to ask before we kind of come to a close about this idea of digging a new well, because I thought that was an interesting image. So if you could say more about that, what's that invitation about?
Well, I got that phrase from Robert Keck's book Sacred Eyes, where he says today's church really needs to transform, and that means digging a new well. I recently saw a cartoon with the pastor search committee talking, and they're going, we're looking for a minister with a great vision who will help us keep things just as they are. And that speaks volumes about where today's church is, so many of them. And I firmly believe that we do need to dig a new well in this time of transition and change. I mean, we're facing splits in the United Methodist Church. We're looking at divisions. I mean, think of how I don't have this problem where I am, but I'm thinking about Jackie out there in Norfolk and others. I don't know the splits that are taking place because of Donald Trump and the problems that come with all of that. I mean, how do you manage those within a local church? Fortunately, I don't have that problem, but I think that a part of digging that new well is the description of a thriving congregation that I described in that chapter, which is a congregation that has a transformational experience, that their worship is all focused on transformation. Religious leaders are in the transformation business. And I think about our Robert Barclay and that wonderful experience he had when he entered a Quaker meeting. He says, when I entered the silent assemblies of God's people worshiping, I felt the evil in me weakening and the good raised up. That's what we should all be about on a Sunday morning during worship. Everyone who comes into that worship experience should feel the evil in them weakening and the good raised up. That's transformation.
Mm.
And a transformational experience is a part of a thriving congregation. Another focus, as I said earlier, is cultivating conviction. But that comes through the focus on critical and reflective thinking. I think that Christian leaders are called to that. The fundamentalism that has gripped so many local churches is devastating. You have doctors, physicians, academics in other fields besides religion. It seems like they leave their minds at the front door. And even though they use reflective thinking and critical thinking in their professions, when it comes to religion, they're glad to take the Bible as God's word only, that you don't look at it critically. And that's something the church, I think, has called to do. And that's what a thriving congregation will do. Nurturing community is another focus of a thriving community. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a vision toward mission and service is your last element of a thriving congregation. And so I believe that digging a new well means incorporating those various aspects into your vision for ministry in the local church. And then a part of that is finding a model of ministry and spirituality that we can look to in a time like this. And so the epilogue is John Woolman. I can't think of any kind of personality and spiritual leader we need more today than to look at John Woolman and see the attributes that are a part of his life and what he experienced and how that could be incorporated into our own ministry. A sense of spiritual humility, a concern for the suffering of the world, the connection with human suffering. You remember Woolman's dream, where he saw a mass of matter to the south and to the east. And he woke up and he tried to reflect on this dream. What does it mean? He said he saw this massive matter as human beings in as great a misery as they can be in. And that the thing he took away from that dream is I discovered that I was mixed with them. That what they suffered was his suffering. What pain they had, he felt. And I think today's religious leader, this should be a part of who they are. That there is that sense of empathy and understanding and sharing in the pain that others are suffering. And then, of course, his beautiful concern for the whole created order, which is turning me into a vegetarian rather quickly, by the way. And it's something that we need to pay attention to, the fact that these creatures are God's creation and not just to be used for our benefit. So anyway, my friend Mark Manier has a son who started Inner Light Sanctuary for animals out in Iowa. And he brings into that sanctuary all the animals that have been discarded by farmers and so on, and he takes care of them till their death. And there's a loving connection made between humans and animals. And that sanctuary is a wonderful thing that he's doing out in Iowa.
Yeah. That's great. Well, it's certainly hard to do better than John Woolman, that's for sure. But
he's one of my spiritual heroes, and it's read the beginning. He says where he began to look about the change in his life, and he describes transformation in a beautiful way. He says, "My heart was tender and often contrite, and a universal love to my fellow creatures increased in me." That's transformation.
Yeah. Well, the final question is if you had any advice for other Quaker leaders, and that's pastors, or they could be working for social change, or all kinds of different clerks. Any other advice that you'd like to give? It sounds like part of it is that spirit of John Woolman of being tender to the sufferings of others. But do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, just be faithful to your tradition. And if you're a convinced friend and have become a religious leader within Quakerism, remember the tradition you're convinced in, and don't try to make us into another Methodist or Baptist church. We have something to offer the world in a way that nobody else can. And so my whole theme in coming back to Quakers and having experienced the UCC, which I find a wonderful tradition as well, because I wanted to become a part of a progressive tradition, and Plymouth Church was already an open and affirming community. So I knew that they were progressive, and we would have 30 to 50 people every 6 months in new member classes at Plymouth. Do you remember that, Jackie?
Yeah.
And it was just amazing because they were progressive and open and growing by leaps and bounds. And so there's be faithful to the tradition you're in, and read the classics of Quakerism. Immerse yourself in the giants, and you'll glean from them a great deal of help for your own ministry in these rather difficult times. And believe me, I know how difficult they are. But take care of yourself. Well, the whole first part of my book is on the journey inward and the need to be healthy yourself. How to share your pain, how to recover your passion, how to understand your pilgrimage. And even if you're making some bad choices, they're still your choices to own, and surround them with God's love and move on, and recognize it as a part of your journey. So that would be my advice, quick advice to Quaker leadership in the 21st century. We know it's difficult. We know the nones and dones are growing. But you know what? Some of those folks are going to come to the Quaker meeting and seek us out. And so pay attention.
That's great. Thank you so much,